Energy Media readers, Tuesday or Wednesday, we're expecting that the federal government and the Alberta government will announce a $15 billion support package for the oil and gas industry. And while that's good for Alberta, it's highly ironic from my point of view, because over the last 2, 3, 4 years, the industry and Premier Jason Kenney have been savagely, I think, critical and said all manner of nasty things and have not done very much in the way of building a good relationship with the federal government and the Prime Minister and his party. And this seems to be an odd thing for me. And so I've asked Stuart Prest, who's a professor of political science at the Simon Fraser University, to join me to talk about this. So welcome to the interview, Stuart.
Oh, thanks, Mark.
So let me frame the question this way, Stuart. My understanding of Confederation, I was a history student in university, those many decades ago, and Confederation is all about compromise and building alliances and deal making, and that's how you get what you want. You give a little bit to this one and you get a little bit from that one, and you put the deals together, and that's how you get what you need. The Alberta government under Jason Kenney and the industry and leadership like Tim McMillan from the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers have taken a very different tack. They are belligerent, they are aggressive, pugnacious, all of that. How unusual is this from your point of view?
Well, it is something of a break in terms of the way in which we traditionally expect provinces to approach the federal government. And it takes a bit of thinking to try to explain why that might be. I mean, the traditional way provinces approach the federal government, they want two things. They want money and they want independence. And Alberta seems like they felt like, it was like, given that they went through this extended period of success with the oil patch, that they almost didn't need the money anymore. And all they wanted was independence. And so they were pushing repeatedly for more freedom to pursue their own agenda here in Alberta. And so that became something that was easy to subscribe to, and probably even fun if you're constantly looking for ways to score points on a level of government. Then that's easy to do if you don't think you need anything from them. But if there's something we've learned from the history of Alberta oil patches, that what goes up always comes down. That when you're dealing with a market or an economy that is so dependent on a single resource, it doesn't matter what the resource is, but surely oil is as much as any will go up and go down, and when it goes down, Alberta needs help, and that standoffishness does not work anymore.
Yes, I guess in the age of secession, we see the Wexit movement in Alberta, and all this talk about separation and independence, and the price war and the COVID-19 pandemic seem to have put a stop to that. At least it's not as visible anymore. But this seems to me the perfect illustration of why Alberta needs Canada, and for this kind of support. Now, is there any precedent in the history of at least modern political history of doing politics badly and then having it come back to bite you when you do need the federal government?
Well, I mean, governments make mistakes. We see doozies all the time. It's a bit rarer to find governments that will so systematically chart a course that can then back them into such a corner where they have no choice but to climb down and to go cap in hand and to say, we need all the help you can get, and yes, please, and thank you. And after being just so, as you say, belligerent about things right up until that point. So I mean, it's not unprecedented for governments to miscalculate and to think they have a better position, but for it to be so egregious, and particularly to have it turn around so quickly. The Alberta situation was there was problems in the Alberta economy, but it was of a cyclical nature. Now suddenly we're in a crisis, and this crisis just drives at the very heart of the Alberta economy. And I think that is something that you may not have anticipated, but it's clear that when you are driving so hard in one direction, you leave yourself incredibly vulnerable, and that's what we're seeing playing out now.
Well, there's more to it than just their language, their narratives, and so on. I interviewed some committee members who were working with industry members on Bill C-69, And the industry folks told me, oh, we were at the table, we worked really hard, and our interests were ignored. And when I talked to the other folks from Ontario who were on the committee, they said, well, no, that's really not the way we remember it. They weren't really visible and they didn't contribute much, and they were kind of annoying when they did, and nobody took them seriously. And this kind of behavior gets repeated again and again and again. And I wonder at this point if maybe just the industry and Mr. Kenney are just not very good at politics.
Well, it's possibly they're not good at politics, or at least they're playing a different brand of politics than we're used to seeing, right? That idea of the federation generally would see provinces come with proposals, things they'd like to see incorporated into agreements when they're negotiating with the federal government. But if you, for whatever reason, conclude your political future lies in some ways apart from the federation, and you may not pay much attention to those relationships, and that is a real mistake. That Canada is not going to disappear, and Alberta is not going to cease to need to be part of the federation. And indeed, it's one of the things that Alberta really could bring to the table is a great deal of leadership among the provinces. There are other provinces that share desire for independence and perhaps support from the federal government, and Alberta could play a leadership role in trying to articulate a position that is certainly distinct from the Trudeau Liberals and be a real counterweight at that First Minister's table. But they haven't chosen to do that. And I think that's a real strategic miscalculation. It means that someone else gets to set the agenda, and then when you need those systems that are put in place, your needs weren't heard and were not met.
I understand why before the election and the immediate aftermath of last year's Alberta election, Kenney might have been as belligerent as he was, because there was a sense of real frustration within Alberta amongst the voters and people in the oil patch because things weren't going well, and the Calgary-based executives and management teams are really kind of full of themselves in a way. I know out in British Columbia they call them the Calgary Cowboys, and they're kind of arrogant, and they wanted somebody who would push back, beat on Ottawa with a stick for a while. And I get that, but that doesn't seem to be a long-term strategy for success.
No, I think it's emblematic of again, it's a different kind of political dynamic. And I think it makes more sense if you think of politics as becoming more polarized, where we see ourselves in different political camps. And if this is a project of the other guys, then we want nothing to do with it. We want our projects. We want our guys, our people in government. And if it's not them, we just want to oppose. And that is a relatively new phenomenon. It's actually fairly new south of the border. If we can forget, but the United States was not always such a polarized place. Democrats and Republicans used to look a lot more like one another. And it's really since the 1990s we've seen this polarization. And we're starting to see some similar dynamics here in Canada, where a conservative voter looks and thinks and acts a little bit differently than a Liberal or an NDP or a Green or a Bloc Québécois voter, that the values there are distinct. And so when the Conservatives are paying attention to what that core Conservative voter wants, it's going to lead to some policy decisions that are just quite different than you will see anywhere else in the country. And I think that may be what explains what we're seeing here.
Now, that's a very interesting point that you bring up, because we've seen the decline of bipartisanship in the US, and really, in order to make Congress work, bipartisanship is absolutely critical to it, and this is presumably why they get into these stalemates and that they can't be broken. And I remember Newt Gingrich back in the late 90s saying this was a deliberate strategy, and now we're seeing the consequences of it 20 years on. Is what Alberta is doing kind of a form of that?
I think you can see some connections there. This idea that if there's something being undertaken by the other side, it is almost by definition not legitimate, not what we need. And we see some evidence of that among Alberta voters' perceptions as well. When we think about what the Liberal government has done to date for the oil patch, it sounds trite, but they bought a pipeline. They are investing a huge amount of money in building the TMX pipeline, getting it done, essentially insuring it against private companies walking away from the project. So it will get built. And that was real political capital and real financial capital, and yet it doesn't seem to matter. It doesn't cut much ice with Albertans because it wasn't. It was from the other side, and when you start seeing politics in those terms, then it can make more sense that why you wouldn't want to take part in a liberal bill, Bill C-69, if it seems like it's coming from the other side. It can't be good for us, and so there's not a willingness to take part and try to engage in that push and pull, give and take of politics that will make sure that your interests are enshrined in the final document in some way. So I do think we're seeing some of that, but we're also seeing how that can run into a brick wall because Canada is not the United States and it's not divided 50-50, and Alberta is going to need the federal government from time to time. So all those things are still true, and they're going to be true for the foreseeable future.
Well, you bring up a good point. And this is my last question, Stuart, because, okay, so the Trudeau government has been more generous in some ways than one would expect of buying the pipeline. And now we see this $15 billion package coming forward. Is, based on, your understanding of Canadian politics, is there a point at which, they just have had it, they have enough and they just go, you know what? You're not getting the next one because we're tired of this and this just doesn't work for us. Any danger of that?
Well, Alberta is not making it easy for the Liberal government to provide assistance, but the Liberal government is doing so anyways, and they're doing so fast. So I think that's a bit of a reassurance that seems unlikely. The Liberal government in Ottawa understands, as well as the majority of voters across the country, that the Alberta economy is a crucial, not just cog, but it is one of the chief drivers of Canadian prosperity. And if we see a long-term change towards a low-carbon economy, the Alberta economy is not going to go away overnight. It's not going to be something that we can simply ignore in the rest of the country. It's crucial, and so even if it doesn't win a lot of political favor in the province of Alberta itself, I think folks in Ottawa and the Liberal government there understand that it is crucial to their success and the success of Canada. And so I would expect they would continue to open up the big red checkbook, I think, as you put it. Even if it doesn't win them votes in Alberta, it ensures the continued prosperity of Canadians, and that they need to succeed no matter what Jason Kenney and the oil patch say about them.
Well, Stuart, thank you very much for these insights. Really appreciate it. And no doubt we will be talking to you again in the near future because this crises seem to be coming out of the woodwork. We're not done with them yet, it appears.
No, they're coming in bunches now.
Thank you very much. We'll talk to you again.
Sounds good. Take care.